Welcome back to AnongSay. Handa na ba kayo para sa isa pang makasaysayang talakayan? Well, we are now on our second volume, Paglingon sa Pinanggalingan. Have you ever pondered the age-old question, who were the first Filipinos? You can try explaining it a couple different ways, like with our own mythology, or through religion and faith, or the theory of evolution, and other scientifically backed speculations. This time, however, we'll approach it using what we learned about history, turning away from what has been proven false and piecing together the answer in light of new evidence and sensitivity to our own culture. Alright, unlike what we learned in lower years, we actually didn't come from Negritos, Malays, or Indonesians. If you were paying attention, you would have also learned that the traditional theory of waves of migration, elaborated by our guy, Henry Otley Beyer, with his most vivid imagination, is inadequate and untenable. No, seriously, where did he get all those ultra-specific characteristics of our supposed forebears when he don't even have enough evidence or generic data? He also didn't consider factors such as disease or the environment, which could pose a challenge for small groups of migrants to survive and for their culture to persist as long as it did. Anyways, thanks to our own Felipe Landa Hocano, we now know that Bayer's theory is obsolete. Now, why don't we look at the two newer, more historically factual hypotheses that could enlighten us on Philippine prehistory and the peopling of our country, the mainland origin and island origin hypothesis. So let's first establish what these two were in agreement on. Well, they both asserted that the various major languages across Southeast Asia and even the different dialects spoken by the Filipinos all derive from the Austronesian mother language. The term Austronesian, by the way, comes from the Latin australis, or southern, plus the Greek Nessos, or island. They also agree that the Austronesian speaking population possessed a maritime-oriented culture and that they used bodies of water as means for communication and trade, where they could exchange not only goods and produce but also language and culture. No wonder why we don't just have words or numbers in common with other Southeast Asian countries. We are also similar in terms of traditions, beliefs, art, architecture, and many other practices. Now, what the two hypotheses differed on were the homeland of the early Austronesian speaking people and the routes that they took throughout Southeast Asia. While the first hypothesis postulates a southward movement of human migration, the second one contends that it was actually northward. We will begin with the latter, which began developing about 60 years ago already. The island origin hypothesis, its proponent is the father of Philippine archaeology, Wilhelm G. Solheim II, and he claimed that his hypothesis was more complex and the other leading one with no simple way to and through the Philippines. Indeed, he was very particular with it. He also corrected others' usage of the word Austronesian, defining it as strictly linguistic. He said it was that you call the super language family itself, not the people who speak it or their culture. So to specifically pertain to these Austronesian speaking peoples, he devised the term Nusantao. He asserted that Proto-Austronesians developed primarily from northeastern Indonesia and Mindanao Island, dispensing northwards to the Philippines archipelago, then onto Taiwan, eventually reaching southern China. Having studied the current of the ocean between Formosa and the northern Philippines, Solheim argued that it is more likely for the Nusantao to originate from island Southeast Asia, since the direction of the current is northward. It apparently would have been more favorable, since it would be difficult for them to travel against the ocean. Though he had his contentions, Solheim ultimately did support the idea that a cultural, linguistic, and even genetic level, we have a close connection with our native Southeast Asian neighbors due to our common descent. This brings us to the more recently propounded yet more widely accepted hypothesis by Peter Bellwood, the mainland origin hypothesis. It is so named since Bellwood believed that the Austronesian speaking people came from the Asian continent, which is mainly Southeast Asia as opposed to island Southeast Asia, then off to the southern coast of China, then traveled to Formosa, reached the Philippines, then from there migrated to different directions in Southeast Asia, according to Bellwood. The sophisticated maritime culture of Austronesian speaking people was what made it possible for them to spread the Pacific Islands as far as Madagascar in Africa and Easter Island near South America. He was also the one who come up with the official abbreviation AN, a lowercase n, for the Austronesian languages. Pretty cool. Bellwood then put forward 7 possible reasons for the Austronesian movement from South China toward the more tropical part of the globe. One of these stimuli was the presence of frontier zone. Taiwan and the Philippines were a pull factor for the expansion, since they were perfect places for settlement and agricultural development. Okay, so we have an idea how Formosa and and of course the Philippines happened to be populated, and how the earliest people were adapted and integrated the culture they brought into the local landscape. Now we need to turn our attention to what life really was like for them. One thing that can give us a glimpse of that is their ethnoastronomy, the fascinating way that our pre-colonial ancestors understood astronomical phenomena within their unique cultural context was highlighted in the 2005 journal article by Dr. Dante Ambrosio, father of the Philippine ethnoastronomy. He said that when ancient Filipinos looked up at the skies, they didn't just see skies, but they also saw their own civilization, particularly in the stars. Before the arrival of the Spaniards with the Greco-Roman ideas of astronomy, we already grasped the concept of and created our own names for the constellation. What was known in the West as Pleiades, we called Moroporo. And it used to mark the beginning of planting season. Meanwhile, the Big Dipper we named after a fish trap used back then known as Bubu. And the famous Orion's Belt we designed as Balatik, which was also the title of Dr. Armosio's article. And it refers to a hunting trap that was used for wild boars. Just these names alone reflect the life that our ancestors had in their already flourishing civilization. Before the specifics of the hypothesis, what matters most is that we appreciate the heritage endowed upon us by our Austronesian speaking ancestors and how evidently rich our culture already was before we were colonized. Before we even introduced to the wheel, we already mastered hoisting our sails and navigating the great waters. We were experts at maneuvering and building boats, and one of which, the Balangay, even became the namesake for our pre-colonial equivalent of a state, the barangay. This goes to show how significant seafaring was to us, to the point that it served as a basis for our political organization. Furthermore, realizing how related we are to our present day Southeast Asian brothers and sisters, we can look forward to a time when we put down our imaginary boundaries and once more let the depths bring us together as one people. That's all we got for today, but catch us next time as we have a lot to say about Philippine history. Make sure you stay tuned for the next one. Thank you and goodbye for now.